So Kambashi has been looking at the market. We're now into our fourth decade, and I'm mainly going to be talking about market numbers. We keep these big databases. If you buy all our stuff and install it all, you get about 2 million revenue numbers, from which you can calculate a whole lot of other numbers, growths and all of that sort of stuff. So I've selected from that data to try and give an overview of what has happened recently and some forecasts about what's going to happen. So, two parts. I'll look at recent stuff and then some new stuff where it's mainly going to be comment and some numbers. Technical applications. Now, I should explain, this is a segment that we use that is effectively engineering software, but it does exclude EDA, and it excludes plant floor software, and it also excludes software development tools. So I'm going to be talking about software development tools later, but think about technical applications as a kind of traditional CAD, CAM, CAE, geospatial applications and visualization. So there we are. There's the growth by sector. So this is worldwide growth measured in dollars and then shown the percentage for each of the sectors. So I suppose there's some, old friends there up at the right-hand side, the kind of innovators in this industry, the kind of automotive, aerospace and defense. Big sector, the AEC sector, actually showing lower growth worldwide last year. And I suppose just for comparison to, first of all, to set a scale on this, worldwide, this sector produced 4.9% growth last year. And to try and put that in context, I thought it'd be interesting to compare the worldwide view with a view of the Americas. Now, this is not just the USA. This Americas is, the continent, Canada, the USA, and the whole of South America. But obviously, the dominant partner in this market is the USA. And you can see, the growth's a little bit different there. So some showing higher growth in the States. I suppose one that's interesting is process and pharma there, showing higher growth in Americas, dominated by the US, as I say, than the rest of the world. And, that's an interesting one. If you drill down into that, it turns out that actually a lot of that comes from oil and gas. So I guess it must mean that in 2014, the drop-off in the oil price came too late. I think it started in about June or July of 2014. That was probably too late to influence the buying decisions about the projects to develop, especially the shale oil projects. So overall, that actually gave the Americas a lower growth than the rest of the world at 4.3%. And I think, if you take that in isolation, it's a little unfair, because if you actually look at the recovery from the, the banker-induced crisis of 2008, 2009, then in fact, the Americas, and especially the USA, came out of that that dip more quickly than the rest of the world, or particularly Europe. There was less impact in APAC generally. But the Americas came out of that dip certainly more quickly than Europe. And so that actually means in 2014, for the growth comparisons, the Americas had already come up a bit, and Europe was, managed to achieve some of that, but a year later. So let's look at, I'd like to look at, all 10 of those sectors and tell you something about them. But I thought, no, there isn't time in 12 minutes to do all 10. Brad agrees with that. And so I thought I'd just pick one, and I can really only pick the fastest growing sector. It's transportation. It's a small sector, only 3% of the total. And you can see it's made up of ships and boats, other transportation equipment, various stuff there, containers, large ships being, the 20,000 container ships that are now going around the oceans. And most of the growth, half of that growth, came from the other sector, which is only 40%. It would be nice to think that it was in fact the ships and trade and that sort of thing that was the driver of the growth. I have this sneaky feeling that it might have been the military vehicles, that because armoured personnel carriers, that sort of vehicle ends up in the other transportation equipment. We use the ISIC 4 standard, which has been the international standard since 2008. So now almost all countries are reporting according to ISIC 4. And that's how they define, where military vehicles are in the industry classification. So let's look forward. So on the left-hand side there, you can see two numbers for worldwide, 4.9%, 5.8%. So it's a gently accelerating market, which is good. That's nice. Not exciting numbers, but it's, they're good numbers. Better in the Americas. Sorry, I'm now talking about all sectors. That was just a little dip into transportation. Now back to looking at all sectors. Within that, the US and China are growing the fastest, or their consumption of technical application software is growing the fastest. Of the larger economies, Italy and Japan are near the back with just 3 or 4% growth. So if we look at that, in a diagram, there's 2015 and the share of the market by country. And you can see the US there as the largest buyer of technical application software. And if we jump forward to 2017, well, if I flick between the two, first of all, you can see, France and China change places. It's actually a small change of share. And then secondly, you can see that if we go from 2015 to 2017, you can see Japan just dropping down a little bit. That's because although it's growing, it's at a slower rate than the market as a whole. And I think one of the interesting ones on this chart is actually the group of of the 60 or so countries that we cover. There are 9 of them shown individually. That one on the far right-hand side, the ones that are between 1 and 2% of consumption, actually are going to grow the fastest, in total volume during this period, 2015 to 2017. The little countries, and they've got to be about 40 in there, are not growing so much, but holding their share of the market. Compared to the rest of the world, this really is the USA, and this time the sectors are in alphabetical order. And what this is showing is total consumption is 100%, and this is just share by sector. Which are the big sectors within technical application software? No surprise, AEC, huge sector. How does this compare for this view of the States to the rest of the world? Well, the red bar shows the rest of the world, so the green bars are showing the differences. So I guess the interesting thing is to say, well, so AEC, automotive and machinery all seem to represent a bigger proportion in the rest of the world than they do here in the States. Why could that be? Now, there are probably many reasons, but there's probably one single reason, which is just in terms of speed of adoption. These are AEC and automotive and machinery, early adopters, big users of the technology, and perhaps that has, because other sectors are now following in the States, and that effect hasn't happened so quickly in the rest of the world. Therefore, those sectors are, relatively speaking, larger in the rest of the world than in the US. Of the other sectors, I suppose the one that stands out is public sector, which is a real surprise, really, isn't it? That in the USA, the public sector is such a large consumer of technical application software. Why can that be? And, this is one where I can't claim to be confident of an answer, but I think it is the case that, number one, there are some very large public sector organizations. So, NASA ends up in that category. Well, and then I was just going to say that there are other public sector organizations in the US that operate on us, and I was actually thinking of the Food and Drug people, the FDA and the EPA, who operate on such a large scale compared to other countries that it's worthwhile then having an engineering capability that evidently buys software as well. So let's move on from that traditional, shall I say, CAD/CAM sector and look at a sector, 3 billion software revenue and double-digit growth. What is this? Well, it's systems engineering and embedded software development tools, not included in the previous numbers, but these are the tools used by the systems engineer and mainly the software development people. And you can see there, 13 12, 13% growth. So a more exciting market for the software providers. And let me use that as a pivot and actually drill down into that a little bit. Now, what this chart shows is 6 major segments of that systems engineering and embedded software development growth, showing system architecture as the fastest growing, implementation as the largest sector. And, you know, I just looked back to try and pick out what is really going on here. This radar diagram is just showing one parameter, which is market share difference since 2010. And you can actually see going yellow, orange, blue that maintenance requirements and system architecture have all grown their share within this 3 billion market consistently over those years. So what does that mean? It means companies are putting more effort into that system architecture and requirements level of design than they are to other sectors. And it's not just that we know this and we've seen this and we talk to people and they say it's important, but actually they're doing it. So changing workflows, more systems engineering, simulation and optimization in there. Systems architecture tools, I think, are a really important place. You know, perhaps there's space for a new category of application, agile systems definition, concept and early design. But the takeaways are traditional tech apps, 5 to 6%, but there are hot spots. When we drill down into simulation, we get ranges from 1 to 25%. Tools for software development, double digit for the engineers, more when the corporate IT groups take on that are not only the cloud apps for IoT, but also the virtualized server for plant floor apps. And I would forecast a new nexus around system architecture tools, concept simulation, component choice, design by objective, people trying to figure out how to solve the right problems rather than solve them right. And my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.